I grew up in northern Minnesota in a small town, but I have been living and working in a big city for many years. I inherited my father's hunting cabin last spring, and I waited until fall before deciding to go there. It's only 100 miles from the city, which seems close, but the drive there always takes quite a long time. It's a wild place with beautiful nature and the opportunity to be alone. There's no cell service and no neighbors. I wanted to take a break from the hustle and bustle of the city and breathe in the fresh pine air. But the trip didn't go as planned and turned into a real nightmare. My dog Cody came with me. He's a mix of a Laika and something else. He's smart, stubborn, and has a white spot on his chest. I bought him a new collar with a GPS tracker, not because I'm paranoid, but because the area is wild and Cody likes to follow trails. The tracker gives me peace of mind. I've known the cabin since childhood. My father took me there every fall. We repaired the decking on the bridge where the stream flows into the spruce forest, made coffee on an iron stove, and listened to the trees creak in the twilight. This time I arrived in the afternoon. A dusty dirt road, a hill, a clearing, and behind it, a cabin made of darkened logs, a green metal roof, an old table on the porch. Cody jumped out of the car and immediately began sniffing the steps. I unlocked the door, aired the place out, and lit the stove. It smelled of wood and smoke. My father had kept everything in order, and I tried to keep it as it was. Mugs on nails, a poker by the stove, a set of tools in a box on the right. In the evening, Cody and I went to the stream. It's about a half-hour walk along the trail. On the left is an old windbreak. On the right is a swamp with bumps, and below you can hear the water rustling over the stones. The sun was still above the treetops, and I estimated that sunset would be in about an hour and a half. We would have time to get back to the cabin before dark. Cody walked ahead, looked back at me, and then went back into the bushes, his nose to the ground. The first strange thing happened almost at the creek itself. Cody stopped, became alert, and growled quietly. I walked over and saw a wire stretched between two pine trees. It was thin, rusty, and at knee and chest level. You wouldn't notice it right away. I stopped. I felt a chill. This wasn't accidental, and it wasn't for fencing. Someone had deliberately strung it across the path. I walked around and took a closer look. There were fresh notches in the bark. To the left in the grass, I saw something shiny. I pushed the branches aside with a stick and saw a trap. It was something between a homemade snare and a store-bought trap. Nearby was another snare made of wire with a knot and a stopper. All of this was placed right at the passage to the water where the animal was supposed to pass. The traps were hidden, but not very well. I'm not a hunter, but my father taught me to look. The tracks by the water made it clear. Foxes and coyotes, sometimes moose, roamed here. The traps were not for small game, and there was more. At chest level by the trail hung a black box fastened with a strap around a tree. I touched it with my finger. A camera trap. The lens was pointing directly at the trail to the stream. I felt like I was on foreign territory. Cody growled, the hair on his neck standing on end. I stepped back, breathing heavily as if I had been running. A simple thought crossed my mind. These are poachers, and they know who walks here. The camera will warn them. I went back to the trap, put a long stick in my jacket sleeve, and carefully pressed down on the springs. If you press down and pry, you can loosen it. I got it on the second try. I cut the loop with a knife. I threw everything into the water. Maybe it was stupid to touch someone else's stuff, but I couldn't leave it there. While I was fiddling around, Cody paced around, growling and then freezing, listening. I felt someone's gaze on me. You know that strange feeling when someone is nearby. The forest suddenly became quieter. I said aloud, "Hey, who's there?" My voice sounded quiet, silly. No one answered. Cody started barking, abruptly, and he took off into the bushes. I yelled, "Cody, come here!" He didn't listen. The barking continued along the stream. Then I heard commotion, heavy footsteps. The crackling of branches, blows, and a dog's yelp. Everything was mixed up like in a fight. Cody growled. Someone else's growl was barely audible, and then there was howling and whimpering. Then everything stopped and fell silent. Not a sound, just the murmur of water and the sound of the wind. I jumped up, but my legs felt like cotton wool. I called Cody again, but there was no answer. I grabbed my phone and opened the tracker app. Cody's dot was flashing about 60 yards away from me. I ran along the trail, following the arrow on the screen. The dot was moving away. Slowly at first, then faster. 150 yards, 200, 300, up the slope. Then it stopped. I approached. Nothing. There were lots of tracks. I'm no tracker, but I saw broken ground and smeared leaves, and I found a piece of white fur on a bush. I called out again. Nothing. The dot on the screen flickered and ran on. 400 yards, 500. Where was he running to, and why wasn't he responding to my voice? I followed the beacon for about 2 miles, but never got close to it. Panic set in. Where had my dog gone? What or who had he seen there in the bushes by the stream and then fought with? I stood there trying to decide what to do. The sun hid behind the treetops, and it started to get dark very quickly. I made the difficult decision to return to the hut. I walked back quickly, almost running. At the stream, I stopped and, without thinking, cut all the loops I could see with my knife and threw them into the water. I ripped the camera off my belt and threw it into the bushes. It was probably the worst thing I could have done, but I couldn't leave it there and walk away calmly. The sun was setting. The forest was getting dark. The wind rustled in the treetops. The dot on the screen moved far away, 5 miles to the north, then froze. The signal flashed and disappeared. When I got to the cabin, I bolted the door, checked the windows, and drew the curtains. I knew that my father had always kept a double-barreled shotgun in the cabin his whole life. Unloaded, locked in a safe hidden behind the tools. Maybe someone had already taken it during the 2 years that no one had been here. I checked, and it was still there. I took it out, checked it. The barrels were clean, no rust. There were 5 cartridges. I put the rusty casings aside and took the ones that looked good. I never liked guns, but my father taught me, if you're in the middle of nowhere and you're feeling bad, keep one handy. I put the gun on the table so I could see it in front of me. I lit a fire in the stove and put the kettle on. It boiled quickly. I made myself some tea and went out onto the porch to listen. The wind scattered shadows across the clearing. My GPS beeped in my pocket. I took out the device, and the app showed that the dot was moving again, this time in my direction. Not fast. A mile, half a mile, a quarter mile. I got up and went out with a flashlight to the edge of the clearing. "Cody!" I shouted, and my voice broke. I repeated myself. Silence. Somewhere far away on the ridge, a night bird cried out. The dot on the screen stopped 100 yards from the cabin, then 90, 70, 50. I stood and stared into the darkness between the fir trees, the flashlight illuminating only the nearest branches. The rifle felt heavy in my hands. It seemed as if he would jump out at any moment, as he had done before, joyful, his tail fanned out, and it would all turn out to be a terrible joke. I wanted to believe that. Very much. At the edge of the clearing, where the old stump was that my father and I used as a table, something clinked softly, like iron against wood. Then, footsteps on dry grass. I raised my rifle but didn't aim at the sound. I didn't know who was there. If it was a person, shooting was the last resort. I shouted again, "Cody, come here." And then I heard a strange growl from the darkness, not like a dog's, but wild and unfamiliar. I backed away. I went into the house and closed the door behind me. A few minutes later, I heard human footsteps on the porch. The boards creaked softly. I held my rifle and tried to breathe. "Hey, stop," I said. There was no response. I sat down on the floor against the wall, leaning my back against it. My rifle was on my knees. I didn't sleep until morning. I didn't even lie down. I just sat and listened. Sometimes it seemed like someone was walking on the porch. The rain started and stopped. The wind was either calm or gusty. By morning, I was stiff as a board. My head was buzzing, my fingers wouldn't obey me like after a long journey. I poured water into a mug and drank it in one gulp. I waited until the light became steady. I went out onto the porch. Cody's collar was lying on the ground in front of the porch. The orange tracker box was intact, the green light flashing as if nothing had happened. The strap had been cut with a knife. I bent down and picked it up. The leather on the strap was still damp with dew. I just knew it was over. My first thought was to get out of there as soon as possible. I went back into the house and started packing the things I hadn't finished unpacking. I drove out onto the dirt road before the sun rose above the pine trees. On the way, I looked back. The house stood there as usual, as if nothing had happened. I reached the city by lunchtime. I went straight to the police station. The sheriff, a stocky man in his 50s, listened to me attentively. He didn't interrupt, just asked short questions. Where exactly, what the traps looked like, what happened to the collar. I put the collar on the table, showed him the app, the coordinates where the point was at night. He wrote everything down. He said, "We'll go there. We'll check it out. If there are cameras, we'll try to track it down." He offered me coffee. I declined. At home, I sat in silence. In the evening, I took out Cody's bowl and put it in the kitchen. A minute later, I put it away. I hardly slept that night. That sound kept playing in my head, a short howl and then silence. I saw the cut on the leather strap before my eyes. I thought about how I should have stayed and looked for him, that I had betrayed him, that maybe everything wasn't as I had decided. The next 2 days, I woke up early. On my phone, I had the habit of opening the app. The screen was blank. Without the collar, the app was useless. On the third day, I went out on the porch to get the mail. It was morning, cool, the air not yet awake, and I heard a bark. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The sound came from far away, familiar, hoarse. I froze. The barking repeated closer, and a minute later, a dog came out from the end of the street, skinny, dirty, limping. But it was him, Cody. He saw me, quickened his pace, flattened his ears, his tail whipping the air like a broom. He came up and buried his head in my knees like he used to do as a puppy. I sat down on the steps and hugged him. I cried. Cody smelled of mud and swamp. There was a long scratch on his shoulder blade, the edges torn like a cut. There was another cut on his hind leg, not deep, but already scabbed over. Where his collar had been, there was no fur and bits of dried blood. One ear was torn. He had been badly hurt. I gave him water, more water, then a little food, little by little so he wouldn't throw up. He ate cautiously, looking around as if afraid I would take it away. I threw an old towel on the car seat and we drove to the veterinary clinic. The doctor washed the cuts, gave him antibiotics, and took an X-ray. The bones were intact. The tendons were intact. He said to keep him calm, give him painkillers according to the schedule, and monitor his appetite. The prognosis was good. When we returned, Cody lay down by the door and fell asleep as he had never slept before, without a single movement. I sat next to him and watched his chest rise and fall. It was the quietest day in a long time. In the evening, the sheriff called. He said they had been to the cabin. They found the traps and the cameras, some new, some old. They took everything and wrote a report. He asked if I wanted to file an official report for property damage. I said yes. He promised to keep me informed. We said goodbye. A week later, Cody and I went back to the cabin for an hour in the afternoon with 2 rangers. They showed me the places where they had found the snares before. We stood on the bridge. The water was still rushing over the rocks. Then we turned back. The main thing is that Cody is alive. He limps less, his fur has grown back, and his scars have healed. In the evenings, he lays his head on my leg and sighs heavily like an old man. I sometimes jump up out of habit at any noise on the street, but that's just a habit. Every morning when we go out into the yard, he walks around in a circle, sniffs the mailbox, looks under the bush, and goes to the gate. Then he turns around and looks at me. Well, shall we go? And we go. Only now, always in the open, without shortcuts or unfamiliar paths.